September in 1942. And you can see there, it was to protect the Arctic convoys, and in particular this one route, PQ-18. If you wiki PQ-17, you'll find out the reasons why the aircraft were asked to go out to this area. Interestingly, when I was doing a little bit of research, you can see there it says it's operating in northern Russia, and that's exactly where they ended up. The crews knew they were going on some operation, but obviously there was a lot of stuff going on in the Middle East, Northern Africa, and that sort of place, and they were hoping they were going somewhere warm. I just hope they just didn't pack their shorts and their sun cream, because they'd have been in for a major shock ending up in northern Russia with just that kit. As you can see, there were 32 aircraft in total, and with 16 of each coming from 144 and 455, the Royal Australian Air Force Squadron. So what were we talking about then? As you can see there in the bottom left corner, you can just about make out the top end of the UK, Scotland, and the squadrons were based in RAF Lucas. And then early September 1942, they took the Green Arrow route up to Sunbury and the Shetland Islands, and that was the last time they were on British soil. If you just look to the slightly left and follow the dotted line all the way around, this is the track of the convoys, sort of coming out the locks in Scotland, going out around Iceland, as far as the ice sheets will allow, and then dropping into a port called Archangel in northern Russia. So the idea was to get some Hamdens out to Vienga, which you'll just see in the middle of that circle. And the Hampden track you can see there is in the red arrows. They were initially aiming for a place called Afrikander, which is the bottom arrow there, as you'll see. And the reason being, Pet Salmo, just been highlighted there. With the Pet Salmo was a Luftwaffe base. We were trying to get to Vienga, so the idea was fly to Afrikander, following day take the 1 hour flight route up to Vienga. Some of the airplanes did land at that Montki Gorsk, as you can see on there, underlined in red, but as you can see on there, between the two enemies, it was literally only about 100 kilometers, so there was daily raids. So the idea was then get these Hamdens, torpedo carrying aircraft out to that region, and this PQ-18 was coming into Archangel to get the Hamdens airborne, to keep the German surface ships and submarines at bay. So what happened with our aeroplane? Unfortunately, when it took time to take the right turn across Scandinavia, navigation not being exactly what it was today, it ended up a little bit higher north, and unfortunately flew on a direct route for Pet Salmo. As I already mentioned, Pet Salmo was a Luftwaffe base. They took some ground fire. They also took some witness 2 Messerschmitt 109s to take off and engage. Apologies, then, I don't know if my screen went black. Hope you could hear me. I really haven't got a clue what happened then, but I have come back, so hopefully it's not an issue with my internet or something like that.
No, I can hear you. I can
hear you. Thank you. Yeah. So it started aiming at Pet Salmo, took some ground fire, some anti-aircraft batteries firing at it, but also witnessed 2 Messerschmitt 109s, which engaged the airplane and shot it down. I mentioned there were 32 aircraft that took off, but as you can see on this graphic here, 9 didn't rise, so we lost over a quarter. And what's that in human costs? 16 killed on active service, killed in action. They're the pinked out ones. 13 ended up POWs, and 16 did survive. But what I want to talk about is this one crew just above that line there, P1344. So to introduce you to the crew, Flight Sergeant Gordon Miller, he was the navigator, bomb aimer at the front of the aeroplane. He was really just sat in this small area, which is perspex covered. He witnessed the 109s coming in, and he was talking to the pilot, giving them indications where they were coming from. And sadly, he was killed when the aircraft crash landed. You see on his records, service record there, that the last entry there saying missing. Coming on to Robertson, he was a wireless operator air gunner. He's on his very, very first operation out of training, and indications were he shouldn't have really been in a Hampden aeroplane anyway. Sad to say, he was killed on his very, very first operation. Daniel Garrity, I don't have a photo of Daniel Garrity, but he was the air gunner, and sadly as well, he was also killed during the air battle. It does get slightly better now, and there's our pilot officer Esmond Perry. He had suffered shrapnel damage, arms, legs, hands, this sort of thing, and declared a ditch of the aircraft. He could no longer control it. It was getting shot at by the Germans. He did survive, and he ended up as a POW for the rest of the war in Camp 3. That was a typical crew of a Hampden 4. And there we go, actually, there's his service record, the yellow line being his Hampden 1, and again, he ended up coming back after the war to 106 Personal Reception Centre, which is at RAF Cosford, and just so happens that the Hampden is at the RAF Museum at Cosford. So a nice little connection there. But the fifth person on board that aircraft that day, because you've got to remember these airplanes were going out of area, and they were ending up in an area where there were no technicians, so all 32 aircraft were carrying a technician, and on board that day was this guy, Corporal George Shepherd. George did survive the air battle as well and the crash landing, and he went on the run and eventually was captured, and he ended up in Camp 8 for the rest of the war. He too come back to Cosford at the end, once he was rehabilitated after the war, and he spent 3 months there. To click on, there's dear George, age 92. He came to see us at the Conservation Centre, and really all the information I have about the Hampden has come from him, and he opened up to his 9-year-old great-granddaughter at the time, who gave us a bit of scrap paper with all the notes on. So sadly, George passed away about within a year of us meeting him, but it was an absolute privilege to meet this guy. I've not shown you Hampden up to now, so I thought I'd leave it till now. There you can see the nice sleek lines, totally different to the bomber I showed you earlier, and lots of new innovations on there, single wing, retractable undercarriages, and all these sort of things are starting to come in. So this is a sort of real, of the day, a sort of real modern day bomber. What did we end up with? This. This is the aircraft that was shot down. It was shot down behind the Berlin, in Russia, so it was behind the Iron Curtain. But when the Iron Curtain sort of lifted a little bit, aviation enthusiasts got back out to that part of the planet and started hunting down for these aircraft wrecks. And this one was one that was found and brought back to the UK. And this is it, he says in inverted commas, reassembled in the UK back in 1991. And when the museum first got to see it and wanted us then to take over and start doing a project on it. Totally different from what you saw before. So from that to that. Just wanted to show you a little bit about the airplane as well. There's some of the impact damage you can see. Tail boom is a very, very weak part of the airplane, sheared off. The middle photo, that's an engine bearer. That should be flat. You can see it's cracked and twisted. And again, on the right-hand side, that's one of the propellers. I've indicated the bend in it with a red line. Again, that should be flat. So this is all indicating how much of an impact this aircraft had on the ground. But also as well, it's been involved in an air battle. There's shrapnel damage. There's rounds in it. So really what we were looking to do, initially when I took over, we were doing a half and half, which is always going to be quite a difficult thing to do, restore only half and conserve half of an airplane. But in about 2010, 2012, something around about that sort of time, it was decided then to restore the aircraft to the aircraft that took on its last flight from Sunborough, fuselage only, but to leave some of the battle damage like the bullet holes and shrapnel. So what have we been getting up to? And typically, even if you want to learn about the aircraft, you want to know how it was constructed, things like that. And if you have just a piece like this, there's just so much information on there. You can see during the top left bracket position, you can see where the black paint's not being applied. Just from the rivet tails, you just know the soft rivets as they're using burr, that's to help spread the load. And all those various things on there about the color. I'm suggesting probably on this that the initial color was silver. The gray would have been painted on, but then when she went into the RAF, they used to black out the bomb bays, and that's when the black paint would have been sprayed on, hence why you can see the positions of brackets. When you go onto the right hand one, you can look at the grains, aluminium strip at the top there. There's an indication of rust, so you know a ferrous steel screw's gone through. So just that, without having technical drawings, you can actually gain a lot of information about the aircraft and what materials were used and how they were put together. But we've been very, very fortunate that we got the whole technical drawing pack for the Hampden. Not always the latest issue drawings, but something certainly worth using and very, very helpful for us as a team. Just wanted to show you this one here. This is the crutching mechanism for attaching the torpedo. I nearly said tornado then. But again, we've looked, apart from the surface finish, everything on there is original, even the split pins when we took them out just to check the insides for corrosion and lubricate up springs and things like that. We even bent them straight and put them back into their original positions. So again, the only thing really apart on that it's not it's had is a spray and a good bit of TLC. And there you go on the left photo there, that's it installed in its final position. And again, you can see in the bomb bay just to the right of the circle, actually there's some blistering paint. That would be the original black paint. Again, more indication of the colors in these areas. threw in the right-hand picture because that's the center fuse, the rear fuselage being populated out, and you can see the radios are back in. But I also want to indicate how narrow this airplane is to work on. It's 36 inches or 91.3 centimeters, incredibly narrow, and that's the external dimension. So by the time you start adding in all the frames and put the seats and things like that in, very, very cramped. This is the area that Robertson would have been operating from at the very back, just below the seat. That's the area that Garrity would have been in. Just to show you again a little bit more, when we're doing this sort of stuff inside, we're not always thinking restoration during these type of programs. We're looking at what we can do for conservation. And we know there was a fire on this airplane, and part of our investigation when we were looking through, on the left-hand photo indicated there, you can see there's a bullet hole gone through the this conduit that carried electrical cables. So the electrical cables probably shorted out, and that was probably the source of the fire. It certainly indicates on that. So again, we've not done anything but just conservation on that piece there. Again, a little bit more about the right-hand side there, and on the right-hand photo there, the internals being populated out with all new bits and pieces that come from the museum stores, the air bottles they were on. The airplane was totally robbed out at the crash site. Anything that was of use was taken by the locals. There's the rear fuselage section being having its work done, raised up for us to get at. And that's the area there that Garrity would have been in. The rear back end of the airplane, again, you can see the on the left-hand photo, the rudder and the fin. We built the framework on the back of the rudder, but if you look on the center photo, you can see it's actually covered in fabric, and that's another skill we have in our place. We can do all this fabric, apart from the surface finishes and stuff like that. We can do the fabric work, suggesting there's not many people globally that can do that. In the UK, it's probably less than 10. Just wanted to show you the tail boom under construction. Again, we built it as it would have been built in manufacture, which was in 2 halves. And same with the rear fuselage. These 2 sections then would come together, be doubled up, and have strengthening plates put on. Again, I've indicated some more crash, some more bullet damage, or one that's coming, quite a heavy shell that's coming from the rear of the aeroplane during the attack. Again, trying to build the forward fuselage as well. Using some of the technical information that we've got. This is the framework we built. We built our own little jig so we could get the shape right. And there's some more rebuild, because again, as you've seen with the rear fuselage, when we're doing these restorations, it's just not an external. We want to build the inside as well. And again, the seat on the right-hand side is not from our Hampden, but it is a Hampden seat from another aeroplane. And again, we're just doing conservation work on this. And probably the hardest thing on this one is leather. Leather tends to age hard, and so it's trying to soften that up and keep that as original as possible for as long as possible. There we go, just sort of throwing a photograph. The one on the right is obviously our one against a historic photo of a Hampden cockpit, and that's how far we've got so far. This is just some more shots of the rear fuselage, forward fuselage, and I just indicated on the left-hand one at the bottom there, a caster, because that just has implications in a minute, something I'm just going to point out to you. So how far have we got with this airplane? From what we saw earlier, as you can see, we've made a massive improvement of the aircraft. And to be honest with you, there were 1,340 manufactured. There's this one. There's a nose section in Lincolnshire in the UK being restored, and there's an aircraft which is not in very good condition at all, to be honest, in Canada, waiting for restoration. So this is the most advanced piece of a Hampden you'll see anywhere in the world. So how does it break down? About 40% of it is original. And the tailplane, the tail boom itself is a replica. Rear fuselage about 95%. The forward fuselage structure only is a complete replica, but as you've seen, we've added in original parts from our storage. So display options. So what can we do? We've got the original tail boom. We could put it there. We've got the forward fuselage section in that photograph there. We can conserve that and put it next to the aircraft to talk about the impact, the story of the crash landing, things like that. But also we've got this visiting area here where the wing box would normally go through. And the reason I highlighted the casters, that forward fuselage section is on casters, so we can open that up to allow people to be able to walk through and see both sections. But also as well, what we've got is in the original engines. We've got one section in the wings, original propeller, and we've got a Hampden propeller from another aircraft. So we've got plenty of stuff, but including crew photos, crew memorabilia, and all this sort of stuff, and personal memorabilia that we've collected over the years. So we've got a huge story here that we can tell. Just want to finish off very last couple of seconds now, but I've been very fortunate enough, and this is going to be quite nice into the Jess's talk. This is before Jess, really. We've met a lot of veterans and people that worked with Hampdens over the years. Met the son of Pilot Officer Dennis, and you can see from his logbook entry, P1344, self-service, his very, very first solo was in our aircraft. That would have been, it stays on the operational training unit. We met Ruth Wright, this young lady here in the middle. She was a seamstress working at the Samlesbury plant up near Preston, and she was doing all the fabric work. And our wing, actually fitted to us, came from that area. So there's a very, very good chance that she actually did the fabric work on our flying controls. But the last person I'd just like to introduce is a gentleman I've met on about 3 or 4 occasions now, dear Fred Hill. As far as I know, he's still with us, and he's not be far short of 100 now. But that's him looking at our Hampden back in 2017. He was our very special guest that evening when we had an opening event run around the Hampden. But just to show you a little bit more about Fred and why he's such a hero of mine. You know, as you can see there, 32 ops on Hampdens, 55 on Mosquitoes, so 87 operations in total. 23 of those were over Berlin. You're raised in foreign lands, but Great Russia keeps you faithfully in its grateful memory, like a mother remember her favourite sons. At the plaque, there's a plaque at the crash sites to the 3 people that were lost: Miller, Morton, Robertson, and Daniel Garrity. And it says at the bottom there, grave not yet found. What we do know is the Germans removed the bodies from the crash site and they were put to the German cemetery at Petsamo, which sadly Stalin had bulldozed at the end of the war. That's my very, very short talk on the Hampden. So thank you very, very much. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll hand over very shortly now to Jess.
Welcome, Jess.
Hello. Right, thank you, Darren. That was fascinating. I was really enjoying that myself. Let me just share my screen and get that all sorted. Here we go. Right, hopefully you can all see that. Just pop that up there. Great, so thank you for inviting me to speak today. As introduced, my name is Jess. I'm the RAF Stories Manager at the Royal Air Force Museum. I'm going to very quickly tell you a bit about the project I've been working on for the last few years, which is RAF Stories, which is our digital project. I could talk about this forever, as Darren could with the Hampden, I'm sure. So I'll give you quite a quick overview and then feel free to ask any questions if you want me to come back to anything afterwards. Okay. So I thought I'd start with just a bit of context about the project. So the project was launched in 2018 as part of a much larger programme of events and activities and developments at the Royal Air Force Museum, thanks to a National Lottery Heritage Fund grant. So it was launched to mark the 100 years since the formation of the Royal Air Force. And so this was the little digital project that sat within everything else. And the main aim was to record the memories and experiences of absolutely anybody with any sort of association to the Royal Air Force. So a very broad scope, lots to work with. But how I sort of saw it, and particularly if you know how funding works, they encourage you to try and diversify what you do and engage non-traditional audiences. So my aim was to try and diversify our already fantastic oral history collection that we have in our archives, to try and identify stories that we hadn't captured from various people connected to the Royal Air Force, and to make sure we could tell their story as well. So that was sort of the main aim. The project team was just me and my colleague Dan. So I have an oral history background and sort of community engagement project stuff. Dan has a TV background, so he has been fantastic with all the filming and editing and the content creation, which I'll talk about in a little moment. So that's kind of just the overview of the project. It had many strands, but I'm going to talk just about the digital stuff within this project rather than community engagement and volunteering programs that all came with it as well. So RAF Stories is made up of 2 main platforms. We've got the website, which is on the left, and the app on the right. So I'll talk a bit about the website first, as that is the main hub for the project. So when I do an oral history interview, that could be 30 minutes, it could be a couple of hours, depending on who I'm talking to. And of course, that full content goes into our archive, as it should. But for this project, we really wanted to engage new audiences. And because it was digital and online, our research suggested that the average attention span of our visitor would be about 3 minutes. So we took this as an opportunity to make short 3-minute videos out of the longer interviews. So we were looking for clips that we thought would be the most engaging, sort of emotional stories, sad stories, stories of great achievements, bravery, the most interesting things about new technology, all those sorts of things we clipped into these short little stories. So you can see one of the web pages there for if you clicked on one of the stories you wanted to watch. Now on that web page you have the video. So most of what we do is video. There are some audio files as well though. You get a title, a quote, you get a summary to pad out the story a little bit more. You can have photographs which would go around on like a carousel feature. Of course we have captions and transcripts to try and make it as accessible as possible. But I think most importantly, we also have metadata attached to all of these short stories. So if you wanted to search for something and you weren't quite sure what you're after, but say you knew that you really liked Spitfires, on the front page, you could type in, you could search for Spitfire, and it would bring every story that we've got to do with Spitfires forward for you to have a look at. So we tag by aircraft, we tag by all sorts of different historical events. So if you were interested in Bomber Command, you could do that. But we also tag with themes as well. So if you weren't quite sure, if you weren't that into military history, maybe you thought you wanted to hear about bravery, or you wanted to hear about the female experience in the Royal Air Force. We have all these sorts of different tags as well to make it as easy as possible for people to find something that they might be interested in or could relate to. And that was sort of my aim, to sort of get at least one story for everybody to think, yes, I can relate to that. The favourite example I like to bring up is I've done a lot of work with students, and they particularly like this one story of a gentleman who told about the time he was really hungover, but he had to get into his Wellington bomber and fly it anyway. And they like that because they can all relate to being hungover, but can't imagine flying such a huge aircraft whilst being so hungover. So yeah, that's a quick overview of the website. I'll come back to that a little bit in a minute. We've got the app. Now the app is a great tool because that allows anybody who can download that free app on their tablet or smartphone to add their own story. So the app allows you to record audio. You can upload pre-existing video clips that you might have taken on your camera roll. You can add all the information I've mentioned that's on the website, so the summaries, the photographs, the tags. You can watch that back or listen to it back. And then if you're happy with it, you click submit and that comes straight through to us, and we can then push it out as part of our growing online collection. So it's really useful, and it's great for, if we bump into anybody visiting our sites actually on site, which seems strange at the minute with the pandemic, but if they happen to mention something to one of our visitor assistants, they could be directed to the app then, or we've had volunteers or partner organisations that have been able to use it in their local communities. So yeah, no, it's been a fantastic tool for us to use. Obviously, it has its restrictions. The main one being that because of file size, you can only upload about 4 minutes at a time. So this isn't a tool to record your whole history. It's very much give us your best anecdote. And that fits quite well with what we're trying to achieve on the website anyway. So that's just a quick overview with that. So coming back to the website, I thought I'd point out one of the great features that is on the homepage. It's what we call a feature actually. So these are like a little online collection of stories that we can pull together. So you'll see two examples on the left. We've got the Gulf War there, and at the bottom we've got part of the family. So we can theme them to anniversaries, to mark a certain occasion or event, but we can also theme them with more thematic sort of things. So with part of the family, that was a collection early on from RAF personnel who were perhaps in various minority groups within the wider force, that still wanted to stress that they might be a bit different, but they're still very much part of that RAF family. This is also a great feature for us, because if we work with partner organisations, if they want to do something to mark a certain occasion and reach out to us, we don't have to worry about trying to do the expense of a physical exhibition where we don't have the space or the time or the money for it. Instead, we can work together to build this digital, almost like an exhibition in this space, which is easy to share with their own organisations. It's just a very quick and easy way to sort of work with partners and build something really great for them. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see an example of when you click on one of these features. So this is a collection of COVID-19 response stories we collected from the RAF. So you'll be faced with photographs. You'll see they all have like a little quote on them. Now, early on we decided, you know, if you're a visitor and you weren't quite sure what you would like, you might be quite used to looking at little newspaper clickbait type headlines if you're scrolling online. So that's kind of what we aim for, without being, you know, controversial with some of the clickbait, but enough to make you think that's where I want to start, and then get you on that journey of going through the next selection. Okay, so that is the website. I also thought I'd mention, because we make this short, sharp and interesting, engaging content, it's also perfect for social media. So I took a screenshot of the Royal Air Force Museum London's Facebook page. And so this is an example of us putting one of our RAF Stories videos up on there. And I enjoy it when it goes onto Facebook, because there's so many people already there. There's a big wide audience, and they love to comment and engage on a level that you can't with the website. You have to passively engage that, and you can share the content, but you're not really commenting and discussing. Whereas Facebook is very much the forum for that, to its detriment. I'm sure people will agree at some points, but yeah, it's been fantastic for us. So here's just an example. You'll see there's a comment on the right. People often say, oh yes, my mum, my dad, my great aunt went through this. Now we can then point them back to the website for more stories. We can point them to the app to contribute the story that they're sharing with us. But also it's great for discussion as well. So as you can imagine, if we post some of our stories that are talking more about topical issues, often a bit of debate can break out. So a good example of this was we posted a video from a transgender pilot who had shared with us her concerns about her colleagues in the US Air Force when Donald Trump banned transgender personnel from serving in the armed forces. So when we posted that, there was a real discussion there, as you can imagine. But it was really interesting to see people actively engage and talk about the issues that we're trying to sort of put out there. So yeah, no, it's just a really great way for us to keep sharing our digital content. And here is a lovely screenshot of myself. I thought I'd just add in about how this digital project has got even more digital for us at the moment, because the pandemic has meant I've not interviewed a member of the public face-to-face for a long time now. With the various restrictions, we've just been waiting for the all clear, really. So I've had to get used to using these software pieces online. So this is a screenshot from Squadcast, which is a podcasting service for great audio quality, but also been using Zoom like we're doing now if I want to record the video. So I could do a whole talk about how my methods have had to change and adapt throughout this, but I guess that's for another time. But I just thought I'd mention it. Okay, so I've spoken about this great digital project, but it actually can be pulled into our physical spaces at the museum, which is fantastic. So I've got two pictures here from two different exhibitions in our London site in Hampden. Now on the left, you might be able to see it if you squint, there's a dark wall on the left. That is a timeline and it shows various world events and various RF events, along with audio, video, photographs, like newspaper cuttings, all that sort of stuff. And this can actually be updated as we'd like to do it. So when I'm collecting contemporary stories, for example, at the moment, UK Space Command is all kicking off. So I've been talking to the UK's first space commander. So I've got everything that's going on right now. We could put that there. up on a kiosk, and our visitors could hear what's happening right now and what's to come. And so that's something we can update and change and have the luxury of doing. On the right hand side, so we have these silhouettes of various people within the RAF dotted about. This is Isla, the transgender pilot I mentioned earlier. That is the Sea King helicopter behind her that she would have flew as part of search and rescue. And of course, we have the full interview with her, and we have kiosks dotted around that area. So we could put up the clips of our choice of Isla sharing her experiences, talking about that aircraft right there. So it really brings everything to life in a really interesting way. So it's fantastic that what we do in a digital space can come back into our physical spaces. Now, I'm aware I'm a bit short for time, so Harry did ask me if I could reflect a bit about sharing stories and what capturing history in this way might mean to those that take part, why they might want to share their stories. And obviously the easy answer is I'm asking them, please could you? But they obviously have to agree. And so I could do a whole talk on this as well, but I thought I'd just point out some examples which show the different sort of content that we collect at the minute, particularly contemporary wise, but also why I think that they want that story recorded with us. So on the left hand side of the screen, I've kind of gone for a theme of like recognition, and on the right hand side of the screen, I've gone for more of a theme of talking about topical and social issues. So top left, that is Candida and her mum Jackie, who was an ATA pilot. We have a lot of family that like to use the project as a way to memorialise their family story. So if their loved one's no longer with us, they can pass on those anecdotes, and it's just a fantastic way for them to see their family story live on within the museum. But Jackie in particular, she spreads the word wherever she can about her mum and another group of ladies who were in the Air Force after being in the ATA, and the injustice she feels that they've suffered from not getting the true recognition that they deserve. So for her, it's getting that out there and sort of righting that wrong for her mum as well. Bottom left, you might think that's the ambulance service, but that is Catherine, who is RAF personnel. And during the COVID response very early on, a lot of RAF personnel were allowed to go and join their local ambulance services. So there she is with her ambulance. And it's quite difficult to get contemporary stories that are happening right now, because as you can imagine, there's lots of hurdles, lots of things when operations are underway. But I think, we've heard from the RAF that they quite like it if we focus on things that are at home, that are happening in local communities, because often the public think that the RAF are off doing whatever elsewhere. So it's quite nice for them to get that local recognition as well. Top right, we've got Michelle, who was a paramedic on the front line in Afghanistan. She developed PTSD while she was out there, and went through one hell of a journey until she eventually came back through recovery and became an athlete in the Invictus Games. I'm very grateful for her for sitting down with me and telling me such a deep and personal story of the struggles that she's been through. I've spoken to other personnel that have developed PTSD and have mental health issues. And they want to tell their story often because there's that stereotype of macho military people and everything's okay, when actually they go through a lot, and they often are helping with mental health charities, and they want to get that word out there that it's okay to not be okay, and this is how you can recover. So yeah, that's really important for us to capture as well. And lastly, I just thought I'd mentioned bottom right is the RAF's LGBT network. They came to us because they wanted to mark the 20th anniversary of the overturning of the ban that didn't allow LGBT people to serve in the British Armed Forces. So before this date, if they were found out, they could have been put in military prison or thrown out. So a lot of these people had lived through that change. They'd had to hide themselves, and then when the ban was overturned, they finally could just get on with the job they wanted to do without that extra stress and anxiety. So for them, it was important that they did something to mark that occasion. So we did a series of interviews with them to help them tell their little story within the wider context of the RAF. So there's just a few examples for you. So that's it. I'm out of time, but I just thought I'd say please head to the website, and if you do want to chat to me about anything further, my email address is at the bottom of the screen there. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jess. If you could possibly put the app name in the chat, and also if you could put your email address in the or the oral history link in the chat, then everybody can share that. That'd be great. Anyway, I'll hand over to Harry, and we'll afterwards we'll enlarge on the topic of the oral history, which is very important actually. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I'm delighted to be speaking with you all. I'm particularly pleased to be following Jess and Darren, who both gave such excellent talks, and to show you the breadth of work we're doing at the RAF Museum. I think it follows quite nicely on from Jess's talk in terms of the digital aspect. I'm going to discuss commemoration and memory in the UK web space. Now, in total, this research draws on data from around 1,000 websites and 500,000 tweets. So this doesn't represent the whole of the UK web space. Jess mentioned how important Facebook is. We can't capture that data because Facebook doesn't make it available. But it is, however, a large body of evidence. I'm happy to discuss the technical details of web scraping and text analysis in the Q&A. But in my talk, I want to focus on how the succession of 75th anniversaries offers an opportunity to discuss and consider how our recollection of the past is shaped by where we are in the present, and how online commemoration and memory differs from one anniversary to the next. Now I'm going to begin by considering VE Day. I should probably go into presentation mode. There we are. So, VE Day. Churchill described VE Day as the victory of the cause of freedom in every land. However, victory in Europe has never been such a simple moment. Victory in Britain, of course, is marked on the 8th of May, and in Russia, Victory Day is on the 9th of May. Between the two is Eastern Europe, where VE Day was by no means the victory of cause of freedom in every land. However, VE Day 75 commemoration and memory of the UK web space does not focus on that complexity. Instead, VE Day commemoration was a container of modern meaning. It's a representational project for where we are in the present and what we want the past to have stood for, not necessarily what it did. But the sheer scale of the data shows that VE Day was a significant event in British popular culture. Given the size, we cannot consider the meaning of each individual tweet. We've got 466,000 tweets in the entire corpus. And given the size, we just can't look at each one. Instead, we need to distance read the results through text analysis. In doing so, we find that the idea of remembering is hugely important. You can see it's the most sort of frequent term. It's the 5th and 4th most frequent term in original unique tweets put out by individual users, and the 4th most frequent term in terms of retweets, where people are putting out new content. And those unique tweets are largely self-created, as I say, by the public. So they're very interesting. But the retweets are what most people will have been seeing on Twitter. Again, a really fascinating insight to what the UK web domain looked like during VE Day. As I say, what a lot of people would have seen. And this data was primarily UK tweets, hence the prominence of Britain. You can see it's the 19th in the original tweets, the 10th in Britain. There are American tweets in the corpus, but yeah, primarily we're looking at UK tweets here. Interestingly, prominence of home in here. This is a real COVID aspect. VE Day at home is a big hashtag. It's linked to the restrictions going on. And that idea of freedom comes through really strongly in both. That's what in the UK, VE Day is very heavily associated with. But we can see significant differences between the two. And peace is a term that appears far less frequently in the tweets that people are creating to discuss VE Day, as is history, which suggests that communication on VE Day was not always about looking backwards. However, at the same time, the idea that data shows a reflection of the contribution to victory is shown here by the contribution, by the discussion of both, by the discussion of women. So Jeff mentioned that something which Jackie Mortgage's relative was very keen to promote. And actually, interestingly, in the UK web space, we can see the discussion of the role of both men and women in the Second World War and their role in the victory. was discussed a lot. It's a real transformation in how we conceive the Second World War, and it comes through very strongly, particularly in comparison to those other histories below. So there are only 540 references to the Polish contribution in the captured unique tweets. That's out of 120,000 captured unique tweets. So very small, but it's still far larger than in comparison to other British allies in Europe, and also in comparison to the Indian contribution. We do see that discussion of the Polish contribution and the Indian contribution in particular come through much more strongly in the retweeted content. And each of these topics is part of the online commemoration. However, although there is coverage of these issues, VE-Day on the UK website was much more about celebration. So you can see celebrate, third most common term, VE-Day is the first most frequent term used, unsurprisingly, but celebrate, really very strong, happy party, and it's tea. So we really know this is a British set of tweets. Celebration is retweeted 31,000 times in the unique tweets. It's a huge feature of VE-Day. And that sets VE-Day 75 apart from Arnhem and Dresden 75. In the UK, it's a celebration first, a moment of commemoration second. However, memory is still very important, and particularly when that intersects with the idea of family. And this data shows people are making personal connections to VE-Day on the basis of their past. Quickly whip through this because I know we're behind time. There's lots of data to share though. I think what's really fascinating as well is the idea of how the role of the people who served is discussed. Very often they're used, described as heroes. They're heroes first, servicemen second in these tweets. Less skewed in terms of retweets, but heroes still holds that real resonance in the content people are choosing to share. And then we see the idea of sacrifice and service come through very strongly. I'm going to suggest to you that's because of the situation with COVID. That really reinforced that idea of the need to sacrifice, that idea of service, protecting the NHS, a theme that comes through. And the NHS is the 131st most frequent word in the unique tweet corpus. So it's a unique aspect of this commemoration, but it was taking place during COVID restrictions. I'm going to whip on to Arnhem. Arnhem 75 represented the UK web space in 2019. We did a collection with the British Library, which is in the UK Web Archive, and you can see the URLs we captured. We also got tweets, so 42,000 tweets. Of course, Arnhem's immortalised through a bridge too far. It's a unique moment in the British Second World War historiography, partly because it's a sort of glorious failure, a la the sort of charge for Light Brigade. So yeah, the content of the online corpus in many ways is reflected in the historiography of Arnhem. So the Polish contribution is discussed on Twitter, but it's done in the context of having previously been ignored because the original historiography very much neglected the important Polish contribution. That's changed, and interestingly, we see that reflected online. It's the 46th most frequent term in the website corpus. It's also heavily frequent in terms of the tweets we get. Also neglected in the historiography is the contribution of glider pilot regiment. It's much less discussed than the parachute regiment. And again, we find that in the data we're capturing. So we can see here, sort of a web cloud of all of the data we got. You can see airborne, very big, but just above it is parachute. Glider doesn't appear here. But there's a very much a commercialization of the Arnhem history. You can see that's a clickbait title. So it's rainbows and unicorns, very much a commercial site. This is a website run by a company which makes a profit based on you clicking through and sharing content. And Arnhem 75 was exploited commercially by websites using the anniversary as a way of attracting attention. Big feature of it. However, remembrance and commemoration were the key themes of online content associated with Arnhem 75, particularly focused around the veterans of Arnhem. But they've always been hugely important in terms of sharing and commemorating the story of Arnhem, particularly in Holland. Arnhem's spirit, very, very unique. And there was a sense this was the last big commemoration we would have with the veterans, and that comes through very strongly in the content that's being shared. So veterans, very, very common term. And it's a defining feature of Arnhem 75, more so than in VE-Day 75. But there was also a more neutral use of language in terms of Arnhem. It's more nuanced. It's put into context a lot more. and particularly by those organisations contributing, like the British Army. So the German role was put into context, particularly on websites. Images of veterans have more positive terms, and as with VE Day, relatives are shared a lot. You see the bottom left, that's a tweet put out. I've contacted both Darren and Tony to ask if I can use their tweets. And he shared a letter. We were able to find primary evidence. This isn't an archive, but we could search our corpus through distance reading for primary material and draw it out. So a really fascinating way of using this sort of data scrapes as well. But if we look at the data as a whole, we can see captured websites discuss the role of the Germans and the actions around British more frequently than the tweets. In part, this is the nature of the medium. Twitter offers only short snippets. Britain was less prominent in comparison to VE Day, particularly in the tweets. And again, that reinforces the idea that the online memory of Arnhem is far more nuanced. Instead, the Twitter corpus has more frequent references to remember. That idea of, hashtag lest we forget, really common, particularly around sharing stories of one's own relatives who'd served and had died at Arnhem. So very much in the context of relatives. So remembering is prominent in both VE Day, VE Day 75, not to the same extent, but it's also a feature of Dresden 75, although the context of that memory is very different. Now, the hashtag Dresden 75 only returned 179 tweets, and that in itself is quite a stark difference to VE Day 75 and Arnhem 75. People didn't use this hashtag to share content, which is interesting. There are some interesting results from Dresden 75 anyway, but it's not possible to draw statistically significant conclusions from those results. So instead, the main corpus uses just Dresden, not hashtag Dresden, any tweet which has Dresden in it. And that returns 5,000 unique English tweets. So 14,000 in total, many of them German, because they're talking about their own history. We're interested in the UK web space for this. That's 5,000 tweets. But it also has a proportion of words which are just miscellaneous. So, for instance, I didn't realise that Dresden flowers or something was a quilting term until I got this data. Now, looking at the most frequent words in the Dresden corpus, some of those are pretty much to be expected given the history of the bombing. So I'm just going to put those into comparison with the next set of words. Those first 7 you saw going down towards America. The next 13, war crime is almost as frequent as the American contribution to Dresden. There's a real sense of this being an atrocity in a lot of the discussions of Dresden. And you see that horrific also comes through. However, doubt is in there as a prominent term. I think that represents that alongside those entrenched positions, there is an uncertainty of where Dresden actually sits in the narrative of the Second World War from a lot of people engaging with this history online. But in comparison to both VE Day and Arnhem, very negative sentiments attached to Dresden, unsurprisingly. So it's a feature of the entire data set. Using machine learning, we can analyze the sentiment of the entire language in the corpus, and it's from primarily very negative. Now, below these results is the idea of responsibility. Winston Churchill is frequently referenced, almost twice as much as Alf Harris. And this links in discussion of Dresden responsibility with that being personally assigned to Churchill for a particular reason, often connected with Roosevelt. It's very anti-Semitic. These tweets are from a known Holocaust denier and an anti-Semitic ideologue. And you can see they do gain traction online. It's a feature of commemoration in Dresden, but there is a strong anti-Semitic theme, not just online. Of course, it's derived from David Irving's work on Dresden, which propagates these false numbers, putting them into 100,000s. So those artificial figures. And that's reflected on the online websites as well. I'm not going to go into them in detail because it's pretty grim, but there's a lot of anti-Semitic content. However, it's not just anti-Semitic, there's also anti-fascist content, which is more pleasing to see. And that's very much captured. You can see in the background, the linking of the hands is a big feature, that human chain against fascism. But what I would suggest the far right have been very successful in doing, both in Germany and in terms of the overall narrative, is in building this idea of victimhood in. And that's represented throughout the corpus. This tweet is from an anti-fascist organization, 20,000 members, they use the term victim. That's not something which is common throughout the entire bombing war. very, very much focused on Dresden more than any other episode. So, as I say, not all of the captured content leans towards the extreme, but it's a significant portion which is anti-fascist. However, that idea really does come through strongly. The most common term we find, however, to describe Dresden isn't victim, it's people and civilian. But victim is the 41st most frequent term in the corpus. It's a big part of online memory. And that the memory of Dresden remains contentious is also shown by the fact that Coventry is in the top 100 most frequent terms. And there's an idea of drawing a comparison the other way as well. There's extremes on both sides. And that's an example, this tweet up there is an example we can find when we look closer, having done the distance reading to see Coventry's frequent, go in to see how it's being discussed. And we see these kind of discussions, another extreme. So it's very much a contested commemoration. Conscious of time, but I don't want to end on Dresden pretty grim. So instead of going back to VE Day, what I want to show is the prominence of the royal family. The tweet on the right, which was put out by the Queen, my face is currently hiding it, unfortunately. That was retweeted 10,000 times. Overall, we captured 5 unique tweets from directly from the royal family with 118,000 interactions. But there's also thousands of other tweets stating what the Queen's message was. And royal involvement is also prominent in the commemoration of Arnhem in Dresden. They're at the centre of a lot of the commemoration work which is going on in the UK web space, which is, I think, quite an interesting insight. Now, each of these commemorations differed and what led to centre of online memory. VE Day was a positive celebration of heroes. Arnhem, a reflective commemoration focused on veterans. Both people reflected on their connections to the event. Dresden remains a point of contention. So commemoration of memory in the UK web space fits the pattern seen more widely in British collective memory and offers points of insight we can explore in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Harry, for that, and also thank you to everybody for your presentations. As you quite rightly pointed out, VE Day is certainly not something universally regarded. Certainly, where I am now in Latvia, of course, it wasn't, and also it was actually very interesting to bring out the story of Dresden. Was it justified or not? And the strategy of whether, well, the thing is that both the British and the Germans sort of, we bombed Dresden, they bombed Coventry, and of course, civilian life was lost, but it didn't actually make, I don't think it actually made that much difference to the outcome of the war, insofar that it stiffened the resolve largely of people, as opposed to bombing people into submission, as it were. So I mean, it's a difficult question, but actually I think that talking about these subjects is a way of actually properly gaining some knowledge, and well, we're opening up these subjects, and also not only the bombing of Dresden, but also Jess's point about the oral history and all sorts of issues, transgenders in the Royal Air Force, and so on and so forth. I mean, the thing is that I think that the good thing about the webinar format is that we can bring out all of these issues out live to public, wherever they may be. So anyway, thank you. Thank you, panel. Harry, have you got anything to to add on that, or anybody?
I mean, Dresden's very contentious. I think the only thing I would say here is that we can't not talk about it because of that reason. When we abandon that space to actually discuss the facts, what happens is that the extremes on both sides come forth, and I don't think that's a good place to be.
Yeah, well, anyway, we're almost running out of time. I mean, so going on about, well, sorry, it's not directly to do with VE Day, but the next webinar in this series at 2:30 will be about the occupation museum in Latvia, the KGB museum in Latvia, the Soviet occupation museum in Georgia, and the war childhood museum in Sarajevo, Bosnia. So I mean, it's kind of it's not a direct link, of course, but I mean, I say that, but there is a theme, shall we say? So I've put a link. I've put a link in the chat. So if anybody's interested to attend or take part, that they might find it of interest. Anyway, we've got thanks for that, and also we've had a comment from we had a couple of comments in the chat program. But anyway, I thank you very much, and I think that I mean, talking about the oral history thing, it's Jess is actually, well, she founded the thing or whatever, but the oral history bit is actually very good, and with my own neck of the woods, fortunately, old lady who was my grandmother's housekeeper, whatever, she's still alive, and it makes me want to take a recorder, sit her down and actually get her to speak about things, because she lived through the occupation, the Soviet occupation, and there were stories that I remember my father telling me as a child, that, well, she was present in the same building as I'm sitting in, and so actually the oral history is one of these things that hasn't been a traditional museum object, but is a very valuable resource. Anyway, I thank you, everyone. Also the engineering skills, Darren, is sort of like, wow. Brilliant,
yeah,
job, you know, fantastic.
Yeah, I'm amazed by what my team produce. A very dedicated team, very skilled.
Well, I can see that, yeah. Next time in UK, I will certainly be very happy to. I'll be very happy to see it.
Yeah, please do come across. Yeah.
I'll
Albert,
be glad to, as soon as I move again. Yes.
yeah. Just one thing come in, Albert, and maybe it's a good question. Michelle has asked: Is the video link going to be put anywhere so her sons can watch it later from the last hour that we just recorded?
Yeah, I will. I'll stop recording now. I will share a link or something with you. I mean, with the museum.
Okay.
And I will so that it actually can be shared, stored, whatever. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Let's keep in touch, and we'll go into the next session. And of course, let's hope that this is not the last. This is not the last